The great hall was quiet, save for the soft hum of the advanced machinery in the walls. The atmosphere was thick with tension as Lucas walked into the grand chamber of the Zira's palace. His boots clicked softly on the polished floor, and his eyes scanned the room. His mission was clear: to meet the alien queen, negotiate peace, and find a way to strengthen the relationship between the human colonies and the alien worlds. But there was something else he had to face first: the queen herself, Zira. The ruler of this realm stood at the far end of the chamber, her silhouette framed by the tall, shimmering windows that stretched high above her. She was tall, with an imposing presence that was hard to ignore. Her skin shimmered in shades of violet and silver, and her eyes, glowing faintly with an unnatural light, narrowed as she watched him approach. Lucas had been briefed on her reputation: proud, unforgiving, and with a quick temper, but he was ready. He had dealt with difficult leaders before. Still, nothing could have prepared him for the chilling silence that filled the room the moment their eyes met. "Human," Zira's voice rang out, crisp and sharp. "You are here to negotiate, yes? To beg for mercy, perhaps?" Her words echoed off the walls, each one heavier than the last. Lucas straightened, the weight of the moment pressing down on him. He was here to bring peace, not to bow down. He had a reputation for standing his ground, even when others failed to do so. But Zira's command was not just an order, it was a challenge. Without another word, she stepped forward, her boots echoing against the stone floor. The other leaders of her council, alien beings of various shapes and sizes, stood in the shadows, watching. They knew what was coming. Zira would test the human, make him bend to her will. That was how it worked here. "Human, kneel," she demanded, her voice cold and steady. "Bow before me as you should. Show respect for your betters." Lucas's heart beat a little faster, but he did not move. He had expected this, but there was a part of him that resisted. Kneeling was not a symbol of submission for him. It was a gesture that required trust, respect, and mutual understanding. He had come here to negotiate peace, not to fall in line with the alien queen's expectations, but then something unexpected happened. Lucas took a step forward. Zira's eyes narrowed in surprise. She had not expected this. He was a human, and humans were known for their pride. She thought he would resist, argue, or refuse to comply. But instead, Lucas moved with an ease that unsettled her. He wasn't defying her. He was stepping into her power, not as a subject, but as an equal. He stood before her, their faces mere inches apart. For a moment, neither moved. The silence stretched long between them, thick and heavy. The alien council watched in silence, unsure of what would happen next. Lucas could feel their eyes on him, waiting, curious, perhaps even skeptical. Zira blinked, her icy facade momentarily cracking. She had never been met with such calm confidence before. It was as if the human was not intimidated by her or her command. She was used to having people bow to her, to submit without question, but Lucas was different. He was not doing it out of fear. There was no hesitation in his movements. "You will kneel before me," she repeated, this time with a trace of irritation in her voice. Her sharp gaze burned into his, trying to push him into submission. She thought that this would break him, that he would finally acknowledge her superiority, but Lucas simply stood there, unfazed. A small smile tugged at the corner of his lips. He understood now. Zira had power, yes, but it was the kind of power that demanded respect through fear and force. He wasn't afraid of her. He was here to show her that true power wasn't about dominance. It was about understanding without saying another word. Lucas lowered himself onto one knee, bowing not out of submission but out of respect. It was a calculated move. A silent message that said, "I see you, I acknowledge you, but you will not break me." The chamber was still. Zira watched him, confused and intrigued. This was not how she had expected the encounter to go. She had imagined him crumbling beneath her gaze, begging for mercy, offering everything to gain her favor. But instead, Lucas had done something different. He had given her exactly what she wanted, but not in the way she expected. She had demanded submission, but what she got was something far more unsettling. Lucas wasn't kneeling because he feared her. He was kneeling because he understood something about power that she hadn't yet learned. In that brief moment, Zira realized that her control over him was not absolute. There was something else at play here, something she had never encountered before. "Stand up," she commanded, her voice softening. Though still laced with authority. Ment, the alien queen's sharp eyes watched him as he stood, her expression unreadable. "You are not what I expected, human," Zira finally said, her voice quieter but still carrying the authority she had come to rely on. She stepped back, her elegant robes flowing behind her like a shadow. The alien leaders in the room shifted uncomfortably, exchanging confused glances. They had never seen anyone, let alone a human, respond this way to Zira's demands. Lucas remained standing, his posture relaxed yet poised. "I'm sure I'm not," he replied, his voice even and calm. There was no hint of fear in his tone, no pleading, just a simple acknowledgement. He wasn't afraid of her or her command. The quiet tension in the room continued, but now it had shifted. Zira wasn't the one in control anymore. Zira took a moment to collect herself. She was not accustomed to losing control, especially to someone she considered an inferior. Yet here was Lucas, a human, who had not only defied her expectations, but also left her wondering if she truly understood power. "Do you think you can stand against me, human?" she asked, her voice now carrying a slight edge of challenge. Her hands clasped behind her back and her head tilted slightly, sizing him up. Lucas met her gaze, unwavering. "I don't need to stand against you, Zira. I don't want to fight you. I want to understand you," he said, his words carrying a weight that seemed to hang in the air. Zira was taken aback. She had prepared for a battle, for an argument, for anything that might break the human's confidence. But instead, she found herself facing a calm, composed man who wasn't trying to win or lose. He was simply offering something she had never considered, understanding. "What do you understand about power, human?" she asked, crossing her arms as she looked down at him, her gaze still sharp and penetrating. Lucas thought for a moment before speaking, his voice steady and clear. "Power doesn't come from forcing people to kneel. It doesn't come from making others bow to your will. Power comes from knowing when to kneel and when to stand. It's about knowing when to fight and when to listen." Zira studied him, her eyes narrowing as she processed his words. She had always believed that power was something that could only be claimed through dominance, through control over others. But this human, this man who had come to her world, was telling her something completely different. Was power truly about submission and control? Or was there more to it than that? "You speak as if you know me, human," Zira said, her voice now tinged with curiosity. "But you can't possibly understand what it's like to carry the weight of an entire world on your shoulders." Lucas tilted his head slightly, his gaze softening. "I don't need to understand your world to understand what it feels like to carry a burden," he said, his voice gentle but firm. "I'm not here to take anything from you, Zira. I'm here to offer something, a chance to see beyond the walls you've built around yourself. A chance to see that power doesn't always come from standing above others. Sometimes it comes from standing with them." For the first time, Zira felt a flicker of something unfamiliar, something she had never expected from a human. It wasn't fear or anger or even defiance, it was respect. There was something about Lucas's calm demeanor and his words that unsettled her. It was as if he was seeing her not as a queen, but as a person. She stepped closer, closing the distance between them. The tension between them was palpable, but it was different now. Instead of the anger and pride that had initially filled her, there was something else, curiosity, interest, and, for the first time in a long while, a feeling she couldn't quite name, a sense of vulnerability. "I don't need your understanding, human," Zira said, though her tone was less forceful now, more contemplative. "I rule here because I must. My people depend on me." "I understand that," Lucas said, his voice calm. "But leadership isn't about carrying the weight alone. It's about knowing when to ask for help, when to trust others. That's true power, Zira, not control, but cooperation." Zira stood still, her eyes locked with his. His words weren't like the flattery or empty promises she was used to hearing. They were honest, raw, and strangely comforting. She didn't want to admit it, but she found herself listening. For the first time, she didn't feel like she was speaking to an inferior. She felt like she was speaking to an equal. "You think I need help?" she asked, her voice softer now, as if the challenge had faded into something more personal. "I think everyone needs help," Lucas replied, his eyes sincere. "Even the strongest leaders, maybe especially them." Zira studied him for a long moment, her mind racing. She had spent so much of her life maintaining a perfect image of strength, of invincibility. But now, in the presence of this human, she was questioning everything she had believed about power and leadership. Without thinking, Zira took a step back, her eyes still on Lucas. "Why do you say these things? Why don't you fight me?" she asked, a hint of frustration creeping into her voice. Lucas smiled faintly, his expression gentle. "Because I don't have to. The world is full of battles, Zira. Some are won with strength, but the most important ones are won with understanding." The queen stood there, her mind a whirlwind of thoughts. She had never been so unsettled in her life. The human before her was not what she had expected. And, in that moment, she realized that she didn't know what would happen next. But for the first time, she felt the possibility of something new. The tension in the room was still palpable, but it had changed. What had begun as an encounter full of pride and authority had slowly shifted into something else. Lucas, the human diplomat, stood before the alien Queen Zira with calm confidence, but now there was something more, something unspoken between them. It wasn't fear, it wasn't anger. It was an unsettling sense of understanding. Zira had never experienced this before. She had always been the one in control, the one who demanded respect from those around her. And yet here she was, facing a human who seemed to see right through her. Zira moved slowly, her boots making barely a sound on the cold stone floor. She walked toward the large window that looked out over the palace grounds. Her mind was racing. She had spent years building this image of herself, immovable, powerful, unshakable. She had thought that her authority was absolute. But now, she wasn't so sure. As she gazed out at the distant horizon, her voice broke the silence. "I am the queen of this land," she said quietly, though there was no anger in her tone. "My people depend on me. I have never needed anyone's help. I have led them to victory, to prosperity." Lucas watched her, his eyes soft but steady. "I'm sure you've done great things, Zira," he said. "But strength doesn't always come from standing alone. Sometimes it comes from knowing when to lean on others, when to trust someone else's strength." Zira turned her head slightly, her eyes narrowing. The words hit her harder than she expected. She had always been taught that leadership was about standing apart from others. Her people looked to her for guidance, and she could never show weakness. She had to be strong, unwavering. She had never let anyone see her doubts, her fears, or her loneliness. But Lucas had done something she hadn't expected. He had seen through her. He wasn't just talking about power. He was talking about vulnerability. He wasn't speaking in the language of command. He was speaking in the language of trust. "Do you think I am weak?" she asked, though the words felt strange on her tongue. She was used to being the one who asked the questions, the one who was never challenged. But now she was the one seeking answers. Lucas shook his head, his expression unchanged. "No, I don't think you're weak. I think you're strong in ways you don't even realize. But even the strongest need help sometimes." Zira felt something shift inside her. For the first time in years, she felt something she couldn't control. Doubt. She had never questioned her own strength, but now, in front of this human, she was. She had built walls around herself, keeping everyone out. But Lucas had somehow found a way to climb over them. He was showing her a different side of Power One. She wasn't sure she was ready to see. "What do you want from me, human?" Zira asked, her voice barely a whisper. "Why are you here?" Lucas took a deep breath, his eyes meeting hers. "I'm here because I believe there's a way for us to work together, to build something better. Not just for our people, but for both of us." I'm not here to take your throne or challenge your authority. I'm here to help you, Zira, if you'll let me. Her heart skipped a beat. She had expected him to beg, to plead, to offer her anything to gain her favor. But instead he was offering something entirely different: partnership, cooperation. It was foreign to her, but it was also strangely appealing. For once, Zira wasn't the one holding all the cards. For once, she wasn't the one in charge. She turned away from the window, her gaze returning to Lucas. "You think you can help me?" she asked, her voice laced with both challenge and curiosity. "What makes you think you can change anything?" Lucas didn't flinch. He simply stood there, steady and calm. "Because you're not alone, Zira. You don't have to carry everything on your shoulders. You don't have to be the only one making decisions. There are others who can help, others who will stand with you. You don't have to fight every battle by yourself." Zira's chest tightened. His words felt too true. She had always felt the weight of the crown on her head, the responsibility of her people pressing down on her. She had built walls to keep herself safe, to protect herself from the fear of failure. But Lucas was telling her that she didn't have to do it all alone. And for the first time in a long time, she wasn't sure if she could handle that idea. "Why me?" Zira asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Why are you doing this? Why are you offering your help?" Lucas smiled, a small, knowing smile. "Because I see you, Zira. I see past the crown, past the title. I see the person who's been carrying all this weight for so long, and I want to help you lift it." Zira's heart skipped again, but this time it was for a different reason. She had always seen herself as unbreakable, untouchable. But in front of this human, something was beginning to change. She had never let anyone see the cracks in her armor, but Lucas had found a way in. "I don't know if I can trust you," Zira said, her voice tinged with uncertainty. She wanted to fight it, to deny it. But she couldn't. Something about Lucas's sincerity made it hard to ignore. She didn't know what to do with the emotions stirring inside her. "You don't have to trust me right away," Lucas replied. "But you can start by trusting that I'm not here to hurt you. I'm here to help you, if you'll let me." Zira didn't respond right away. She stood there, torn between her instincts to protect herself and her growing desire to believe in what Lucas was offering. Could she truly let someone else in? Could she let go of her need for control? For the first time in a long while, Zira didn't have all the answers, but something inside her whispered that this was the beginning of a new chapter. A chapter she wasn't sure she was ready for, but one she knew she couldn't avoid. The days that followed were unlike any Zira had ever experienced. Lucas, the human diplomat who had defied her expectations, had remained in her palace, quietly observing and offering his assistance in the matters of diplomacy and governance. She had agreed to let him stay, though part of her still struggled with the decision. She had always ruled alone, and now she found herself in a partnership of sorts with this human, whose calm demeanor and patient presence seemed to challenge everything she had known about power. Zira spent long hours in her chambers, pacing and thinking. Her people trusted her, but what if they learned that she had started to question everything she had believed in? What if they saw her weakness? The weight of the crown seemed heavier with every passing hour, and she found herself looking to Lucas for answers, though she refused to admit it to herself. One evening, after a particularly taxing council meeting, Zira found herself alone in the grand hall, staring out into the distance. The night sky was dark, filled with distant stars, but it was the silence that filled the space around her that she found most unsettling. "Zira," Lucas's voice interrupted her thoughts. She turned to see him standing in the doorway, his presence as calm and unassuming as ever. She didn't answer immediately, choosing instead to study his face. There was no arrogance, no pride in his expression, just understanding. He wasn't trying to overpower her or make her feel small. He was simply there, offering his support without expectation. "You're still here," she said softly, more to herself than to him. "I'm still here," Lucas replied. "And I think you know why." Zira's mind raced, but she didn't speak. Instead, she walked over to the table that held several maps of the kingdom. She had been studying them for hours, trying to make sense of the growing tensions between her people and the neighboring factions. But nothing seemed to add up. "You've been quiet lately," Lucas continued, stepping into the room and approaching her. "I can see that something is bothering you." Zira met his gaze for a brief moment before turning back to the maps. She didn't want to admit it, not even to herself. But something was unraveling within her. She had spent her entire life building walls, ensuring that no one could get too close. She had buried her emotions so deep that she could hardly recognize them anymore. But now, in the presence of Lucas, everything was beginning to shift. Everything. "Feels wrong," she said finally, her voice tinged with frustration. "I've spent so many years controlling everything, making sure no one can hurt me or my people. But now, I don't know who I am anymore. I don't know if I can do this alone anymore." Lucas stepped closer, his voice gentle but firm. "You don't have to do it alone, Zira. And you don't have to be afraid of asking for help." Zira turned sharply, her eyes flashing with a mixture of frustration and something else she couldn't quite place. "You think I'm afraid?" she snapped. "I've never been afraid. I've ruled with strength, with power. I've done everything I could to protect my people." "I know you've done what you thought was best," Lucas said, his tone never wavering. "But sometimes even the strongest leaders need to let go. They need to trust others to help carry the burden." Zira looked at him, her expression softening slightly. "Trust," she repeated the word as though it was foreign to her. "I've never trusted anyone but myself." "And that's been your strength," Lucas said quietly. "But it's also been your weakness. You can't keep carrying the world on your shoulders alone." "You don't have to." For a moment, Zira said nothing. She stood there, staring at the maps, her thoughts spinning. She had always believed that strength meant independence, that she had to stand alone in her decisions. But Lucas was showing her something different. He was showing her that true strength wasn't about being invincible. It was about knowing when to lean on others, when to trust. "I don't know how to do this," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know how to ask for help, how to trust anyone else." Lucas smiled faintly. "You don't have to know everything right now, but you can start with small steps. Trust is built over time, not all at once." Zira felt a strange sensation in her chest, a mixture of relief and fear. She had spent so long keeping herself isolated, building walls around her heart, that she had forgotten what it was like to let someone in. But now, standing before Lucas, she felt that old wall beginning to crack, just a little. "I never thought I'd be in this position," Zira said, her voice soft. "I thought I could handle everything on my own. But now I'm not sure." Lucas's gaze never wavered. "No one can handle everything alone, Zira. Even queens need help." The silence between them was thick with meaning. Zira swallowed hard, feeling something shift deep inside her. It was the beginning of something new. She wasn't sure if she was ready for it, but she couldn't deny that it was happening. Lucas wasn't trying to take her place or weaken her. He was offering something she had never expected: partnership, trust, understanding. "You're right," she said quietly. "I can't do this alone, but I'm not sure I know how to trust." "That's okay," Lucas said, his voice warm. "You don't have to trust me right away. But you can start by trusting that I'm here for you, not to take anything from you, but to help you." Zira's heart raced, but there was a strange calmness settling over her. She had always been strong, always relied on herself. But now, for the first time, she felt the weight of her responsibilities shift. It wasn't about carrying everything on her own anymore. It was about sharing the burden. She didn't know what the future held, but she knew one thing for sure: she was no longer alone. The days that followed were filled with quiet conversations and tense meetings. Zira had agreed to allow Lucas to help with her kingdom's problems, but the weight of her decision still hung over her. She was still trying to wrap her mind around the idea that she didn't have to carry the burden alone. It was a difficult concept, and at times she found herself wondering if she had made a mistake. Yet, as time passed, she couldn't ignore the subtle changes that were happening within her. Lucas, the human diplomat who had somehow seen past her walls, was making a difference. He wasn't just helping with politics or treaties. He was teaching her something far more valuable: how to trust others, how to be a leader who didn't have to be alone in her decisions. One evening, as Zira stood in the council hall, looking over reports about the growing unrest in neighboring territories, she found herself thinking of the future. The pressure was mounting. She had always felt the weight of the crown, but now it seemed unbearable. She had never expected to face a challenge like this. The alliances she had worked so hard to build were beginning to fracture, and her people were starting to question her decisions. The door to the council hall creaked open, and Lucas entered, his calm presence filling the room. Zira didn't look up, but she knew he was there. He had become a constant in her life, a voice of reason when everything else seemed to be falling apart. "I've been looking over the reports," Lucas said, his voice steady but with an undercurrent of concern. "The situation with the other factions is growing worse. I know you've been working hard to keep things under control, but what if he suggested something that would make her look weak? What if she couldn't do it? Val always kept my distance. I've always been the one they turn to for strength. If I show them anything else, I'm afraid they will see me as weak." Lucas stepped forward, placing a hand gently on her shoulder. "True strength isn't about standing above others, Zira. It's about standing with them. Let them see you as their leader, yes, but also as someone they can rely on, someone who is willing to fight alongside them, not just command from afar." The words hung in the air, and for the first time, Zira allowed herself to truly consider them. She had spent so many years building walls, trying to protect herself from the world. But in doing so, she had cut herself off from the very people she was meant to lead. Could she really open up to them? Could she trust them enough to share her burdens? "I don't know where to begin," she said, the uncertainty in her voice clear. "How do I even start something like this?" Lucas smiled, his expression warm and reassuring. "Start with the people who matter most to you. Talk to them. Let them see the real you. It won't be easy, but you're not alone in this. I'm here, and I'll help you every step of the way." Zira looked at him, her heart racing. It was a terrifying thought, but it was also the only way forward. If she wanted to save her kingdom, she had to be willing to change. She had to be willing to trust. "All right," she said quietly. "I'll do it, but only if you're there with me." Lucas nodded, his eyes filled with understanding. "I'm with you, Zira. You don't have to do this alone." The decision was made. Zira knew that there would be challenges ahead, but for the first time, she didn't feel the weight of them all on her shoulders. She wasn't facing this alone. With Lucas by her side, she would take the first step toward rebuilding the trust of her people and becoming the leader they needed her to be. And so, the next day, Zira stood before her people in the grand hall, her voice steady but filled with emotion. She spoke not as a queen, but as someone who had learned the true meaning of strength. She spoke from the heart, admitting her fears, her doubts, and her desire to make things right. That the people listened in silence. And for the first time, Zira saw them not as subjects to be commanded, but as partners in the fight for their future. The days after Zira's speech to her people were some of the most difficult and rewarding moments of her life. She had shown them her vulnerabilities, something she had never done before. She had opened herself up in ways that felt terrifying, but also strangely liberating. There was no going back now. The bond between her and her people had started to shift, and though it was fragile, it was real. Lucas had been by her side every step of the way. His presence was a constant reassurance, a reminder that she was not alone in this. He hadn't asked for anything in return for his help. He was there, quietly supporting her, offering advice when needed, and always giving her space when she needed to think. His calm and steady presence was a balm to the turmoil inside her. She had never realized how much she had craved that kind of partnership. One afternoon, as Zira stood in her private chambers, looking over diplomatic reports from the neighboring factions, she felt a hand on her shoulder. She turned to find Lucas standing behind her, his eyes gentle but filled with a hint of concern. "You've been working nonstop," Lucas said. "You need to take a break." Zira gave him a small smile, though she couldn't hide the exhaustion in her eyes. "I know, but there's so much to do." The peace talks are still fragile, and there's so much unrest in the southern territories. Lucas nodded, but he didn't seem convinced. The work will always be there, Zyra, but you need to take care of yourself too. You can't pour from an empty cup. Zyra sighed, rubbing her temples. She had spent so much of her life focusing on her duties that she had forgotten what it was like to take a step back. The weight of her responsibilities had become all-consuming. But now, in the quiet moments, she could feel the weight lifting just a little. It wasn't gone, but it was shared. And for the first time, she could breathe. "You're right," Zyra admitted. "I haven't been very good at balancing everything." Lucas's smile softened. "It's not easy, but you don't have to do it all alone anymore." Zyra looked at him, her expression thoughtful. "You've been a constant help, Lucas. I don't know what I would have done without you." His smile deepened. "I'm glad I could help. But remember, it's not just about you relying on me, it's about us working together. You don't have to do everything yourself. You don't have to carry the weight of your people's future on your shoulders alone." Zyra nodded slowly, her eyes meeting his. For the first time, she truly understood what he meant. She had been so focused on her own strength that she hadn't realized how much strength came from sharing the burden. It wasn't just about leadership, it was about partnership. And in Lucas, she had found someone who was not just willing to stand by her side, but someone she could trust completely. The next day, Zyra decided to take Lucas's advice. She stepped away from the council hall and spent time with the people she ruled. She visited the marketplace, walked through the gardens, and even spoke to the farmers who worked the land that fed her kingdom. The connections she had built over the years were still there, but now they felt different. She wasn't just the queen anymore. She was someone who had learned to listen, to understand, and to be part of the community she led. It wasn't easy. The fear of being seen as weak still lingered in the back of her mind, but with each conversation, with each moment of connection, she felt stronger. She felt the weight lifting. She was no longer alone in this. And that, more than anything, gave her the strength to keep going. Lucas was there through it all, offering encouragement when she needed it and giving her the space to make decisions on her own. They worked together to rebuild the fractured alliances and mend the broken relationships with neighboring factions. Slowly, things began to improve. The unrest in the southern territories started to calm, and the peace talks showed signs of success. But it wasn't just the political landscape that was changing. Zyra herself was changing. The walls she had built around her heart had started to crumble. She had spent so many years keeping people at a distance, afraid that if she let them in, they would see her weaknesses. But now she realized that it was those very weaknesses that made her stronger. And Lucas had shown her that true strength wasn't about isolation. It was about connection. As Zyra and Lucas worked side by side, their bond deepened. It wasn't just a partnership of politics and diplomacy anymore. It was something more. Zyra found herself relying on Lucas in ways she hadn't anticipated. His wisdom, his steadiness, and his unshakable belief in her had become a foundation she never expected to have. One evening, as they sat together in the council chamber, reviewing the latest updates from the southern territories, Zyra paused and looked at Lucas. "Thank you," she said softly. "For everything. You've done more for me than I ever could have asked." Lucas met her gaze, his eyes warm and sincere. "I'm just glad to be here, Zyra. You've done the hard work. You're the one who's made the changes." Zyra smiled, though there was a hint of something more in her eyes, something deeper, something she had never allowed herself to acknowledge before. "I couldn't have done it without you," she said quietly. And in that moment, Zyra realized something that she had never fully understood before. The true power of a leader wasn't in their ability to stand alone, but in their ability to stand together with others. And with Lucas by her side, she knew that the future of her kingdom and of her people was in good hands. The air in the grand hall was tense, filled with the murmurs of dozens of alien leaders. Zyra stood at the front, her posture strong, yet her mind was racing. Today was the day she would decide the fate of the peace talks and the future of her kingdom. The weight of the decision pressed heavily on her shoulders, but for the first Time and years, she didn't feel entirely alone. Lucas was standing beside her, his presence a calming influence. He had been by her side throughout this journey, and she knew she could trust him. The representatives from the neighboring factions were already seated, their eyes focused on her. They were waiting for her to make the first move, to lead them into a new era of peace or to watch everything crumble. The room was filled with tension, and it was clear that the stakes were high. Zira had spent countless hours negotiating, trying to bridge the gaps between her people and the other factions. But today, everything would come to a head. Zira looked out at the assembly, her heart racing. She had always been the one to dictate terms, to hold the power in the room. But now she was standing here as a partner, not just a ruler. She knew the value of cooperation, of trust. It wasn't about control anymore. It was about building something stronger, together. The realization was both empowering and terrifying. Lucas stood beside her, his gaze steady and supportive. He had been a constant in her life, helping her navigate the politics and the human side of leadership. He had taught her that strength didn't come from dominance, but from working alongside others. "You're ready," Lucas whispered, his voice low but reassuring. Zira nodded, taking a deep breath. She wasn't sure what would happen in the next few hours, but she was no longer afraid. She had the strength to face whatever came next, not because she was the queen, but because she wasn't alone. The room fell silent as Zira began to speak, her voice steady but filled with the weight of the moment. "We stand at a crossroads," she began, her words clear and powerful. "The actions we take today will shape the future of our people, and it is our responsibility to make the right choice. We can continue down the path of war and distrust, or we can choose the path of peace and cooperation. The choice is ours." The alien leaders listened intently, their expressions guarded. Zira could feel the tension in the air, but she didn't waver. This wasn't about making promises she couldn't keep. This was about showing them that she had learned something in her time as a leader, that peace wasn't just a word. It was a commitment. "I know there have been failures," she continued, "mistakes made on both sides. But I believe that we have the power to change. Not just for our people, but for our future. We can choose to build something stronger, something better, but it will take trust. It will take work." Zira paused for a moment, letting her words sink in. She wasn't just speaking to the leaders in the room. She was speaking to herself as well. She had learned that strength didn't come from keeping others at a distance. It came from bringing them in, from listening, from working together. It was a lesson that had taken her years to understand, but now she felt ready to put it into action. The room was still. Zira looked over at the leaders, their faces unreadable. There was a long silence before one of them, an older alien with dark, wrinkled skin, spoke up. "You speak of peace," the alien said, his voice rough. "But peace is not easy. It takes more than words. It takes action. Do you have the strength to back up your words, Zira?" Zira met his gaze, unflinching. "I do," she said, her voice unwavering. "But I cannot do it alone. We all have a role to play in this. If we are to build a future together, we must work together. That means trust, compromise where willing." To consider something other than their own power, Lucas stepped forward, standing beside her. His presence was a silent strength, a reminder that they were in this together. He hadn't asked for anything in return. He had simply stood by her side, offering guidance when needed. And now, as the peace talks moved forward, Zira realized that their partnership was more than just a political alliance. It was a friendship built on trust, respect, and mutual understanding. The room shifted as more leaders began to speak, voicing their concerns but also their hopes for the future. The conversation moved from one of resistance to one of cooperation. They were starting to see each other not as enemies, but as allies. And though the road ahead would not be easy, Zira knew they had taken the first step. As the peace talks drew to a close, the leaders agreed to a ceasefire and a series of talks aimed at strengthening their alliances. It wasn't a perfect solution, but it was a start. Zira had done what she once thought impossible. She had brought her people and the other factions together. As the room began to empty, Zira turned to Lucas, her heart lighter than it had been in years. "We did it," she said, a small smile playing at the corners of her mouth. Lucas returned the smile, his eyes warm. "No, Zira, you did it. You found the strength to trust, and that's what made all the difference." Zira nodded, feeling the truth of his words. She had done it, but she had done it with the support of those around her. And that was what true strength looked like, building something better, together.